Hey everyone, my name's Jessie. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my February wrap-up part 1. So I did this last month where I had to break my wrap-up into 2 separate videos. One where I talked about specifically sci-fi and fantasy books I had completed during the previous month, and then the other one covering kind of all of the other books that I had completed in any other genre, so contemporary, thriller, etc. So part 1 is going to be just sci-fi and fantasy books that I completed for last month. And I have 6 of those to talk about today. So I'm going to try to get right into it so that this video isn't too long. And I'm going to go in the order of my enjoyment. Starting with my least favorite, but when I say least favorite, to be honest, all of these books that I'm going to be talking about, I did overall really enjoy. So this was not like a bad book by any means. I actually quite enjoyed it. And that would be The Subtle Knife by Philip Pullman, which is the second book in the His Dark Materials trilogy, which is a middle grade series that I never read growing up. And I do regret not reading these books because I feel like I would have really enjoyed them as a kid. But I wanted to read the trilogy because I know it's so beloved by so many. So the second book really does start right where we left off, but it introduces a new character to us, a very prominent character that ends up becoming one of our main characters. And I, to be honest, didn't love this new character that we got introduced to. I found him quite unlikable for some reason. I don't know, he just had like a really bad attitude the whole book, so I wasn't a huge fan. I actually ended up liking the first book to this trilogy more than this one. I would still say this was pretty good, especially by the end. I was really into where the book was heading. I just found the overall plot not quite as intriguing. Like, I just didn't care for most of this book, what was happening to these characters. I didn't really care to figure out the mystery, but I have to say the ending did save it for me, where I was like, all right, I'm definitely into this now and I want to check out the next book. Lyra was a character that I really enjoyed from the first book. I found her not quite as likable for me in this book. I don't know what I was expecting, but overall, like, again, this was pretty good. I think if I was younger, maybe I would enjoy this a lot more. I just have very mixed feelings on it. It's very weird. So, and I'm trying to view it from the lens of like the target audience, right? Because this is middle grade, so I'm like not trying to say it's not mature enough, like it's not meant to be that mature. But I will say, like, it does deal with some pretty heavy themes of religion and kind of religion's role in our society, and it's really fascinating from that perspective. But other than that, like, I just wasn't crazy about the plot in this book. I just wasn't crazy about like what we were doing and what we were after and how we were getting there. So this was pretty good. I will definitely finish off the trilogy, but I so far have to say, sad to report, that I don't quite get the hype for this trilogy. And I maybe it's just me and just not growing up with reading this trilogy. The second book I have to talk about is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This was Elle and I's buddy read for last month, the month of February, and we were joined by Jess Owens, who I absolutely love. She is fantastic. I'm going to link her channel, if you somehow don't already follow her, down below. We did our live show for this actually not too long ago, so I'm going to link that live show where we went into spoiler-free and spoiler discussion of this book and all of our thoughts on it. I really enjoyed this book. This is definitely not a perfect book, but I would say that this was very good, especially for a debut for this author. Legendborn follows the story of Bree, who in the very beginning of this book, you find out is grieving the loss of her mother in this tragic accident. And she applies to this early college program at this college nearby, where she attends this college and is essentially given like kind of a head start. It's like the scholarship program where she's given a head start on college classes while she's still in high school. So she is introduced to this whole new world where she kind of stumbles into this world of magic and stumbles across these characters who are descendants of the Knights of the Round Table and King Arthur himself. So this is very much an Arthurian retelling, and it was really, really a cool concept. I really enjoyed the magic systems in this book. There are multiple magic systems. One I enjoyed more than the other, but I will say I wish we had dived a little bit deeper into the magic, because at times I was a little confused as to how it worked, and I didn't quite get enough like examples of it being used to really truly understand like the limits and what each person could do with the magic and those sorts of things. It was a very complex magic system. The other thing I will say about this book is that it reads very, very mature. I would say that this is a great YA fantasy for older readers. If you are looking for YA fantasy that doesn't read too young in tone, this is an awesome one to pick up, because I think any age can get a lot out of this book. I thought the social commentary was woven into this story so organically and was really, really well executed. The themes of grief and kind of how others try to help you with your grief and kind of your response to that, it was all really well explored and well done. I really liked the writing style. I had a couple of plot issues that unfortunately I can't get into because it would be spoilery, but I had a couple of plot issues where I just didn't understand quite the motivations of some of the villains in this book, and didn't understand a certain part of the magic system and why something had to be the way it was. There is a kind of training setting and a competition trope in this where we have characters competing for this certain status, and I didn't really find that totally necessary. I kind of wish that part of the book had been taken out so that we could have focused on some of the more interesting stuff, in my opinion, like the magic systems and where Bree comes from and all of that. I thought was really, really cool, and I wanted even more of it. And then we've got the classic love triangle romance, which I was not a fan of. Unfortunately, I did like our main character Bree a lot, and I liked our main male protagonist, but there was another main character in this book that I was not a huge fan of, and if you watch the live show, you will know exactly who I'm talking about. Yeah, so it's fine. It was entertaining, at least. So overall, I really had fun reading this book. I'm really glad I read it. I definitely will be picking up the sequel and anything else that this author writes. The next book I have to talk about is the second and final book in the Carl's duology by Hank Green, and that is A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor. This was really anticipated for me because I really, really loved the first book, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. It was a sci-fi, very light sci-fi book that takes place in our world, where we have a character who kind of notices in the middle of the night as she's walking home in New York City, this random statue kind of pop out of nowhere, and she records a video, puts it up on YouTube introducing this statue to the world, names him Carl for whatever reason, and that video goes viral because all of a sudden the next morning these statues are popping up in cities all over the world, and we think that it might be aliens trying to communicate. So the whole first book was trying to figure out, who are these aliens? What do they want from us? What is their goal? And it very much examined themes of like social media and the role it plays in our lives, fame and what that can do to somebody. It was really good. I had a lot of fun with the first book, and the way it was written was very witty and funny. So the second book is really interesting. And I listened to this one on audio and would highly recommend it on audio because every character is voiced by a different narrator, which really helps bring the story to life. I still really enjoyed this book. I would still say it was very good. It didn't quite blow me away like the first book did. And I think it was because with the first book, I just didn't know what to expect. I didn't really have any expectations going into it. And the second book, I was really anticipating because I had enjoyed the first one. I think that this one answered all the questions that we wanted answered from the first book. We definitely got the answers we were looking for. It was just how satisfying were those answers. And there were certain things that I kind of just wish had gone a different way. The characters that we got to explore more of in this book were really fun. I love our main cast of characters. They're all very different from each other, but they all kind of have to come together. And they're all very flawed and recognize that and are trying to work through their flaws. So I can't say too much because I don't want to spoil anything from the first book. But if you're looking for answers from the first book, I think you'll definitely get them in this book. It's just whether or not you like those answers, I think is going to define how much you enjoy this book. And I liked some of those answers and just wasn't as crazy about some of the others. So overall though, I'm really glad I read this duology. I loved this duology overall. Like, this was such a fun one that I will continue to recommend, especially to readers that are trying to get more into sci-fi and don't really know where to start. The next book I have to talk about is Mind of My Mind by Octavia Butler. Oh my goodness. This was the follow-up to Wild Seed, and it is the second book in the Pattern Master series. This book was so cool. It was so cool. It was so good. I would say this was very good. It was very short. It read really quick, but oh my goodness, the main character in this book is so awesome. So if you don't know anything about this series, it's so cool. So Wild Seed is kind of the prequel to this book, because this book was actually published first and is kind of like the first in the series, but I do still recommend you read Wild Seed first. I think you'll appreciate this one a lot more. So in Wild Seed, we get introduced to this entity called Doro, and he's kind of this immortal entity that can essentially remain immortal by occupying other people's bodies and essentially killing that other person that he occupies. So he not only kind of possesses them, but he totally eats their souls. So this is essentially how he can live forever. And he realizes very, very early on in his life that he doesn't really know that many other people with abilities like his, especially no one as strong as him that can do what he does. And what he decides is that he wants to start to create this race of human that is essentially like mutated. It feels so X-Men to me, but it's like it's so cool how it's done. And he starts to find people who have these leanings towards these abilities, or maybe like a dormant ability, and he starts to breed them together. And so you follow his story through multiple generations of him breeding people with these abilities together to get stronger people down the line. So he essentially breeds and breeds and breeds. And we come to our main character in this book, Mary, who is telepathic. She might finally be the one who could potentially be more powerful than him. And he doesn't know whether to be extremely proud of that or extremely terrified of it. And it is so fascinating examining their relationship and how she takes her power and what she does with it. It was so cool. It reminded me so much. It was like if we got a character study on Magneto from X-Men, it was like that would be this book. I think it was so well written. The characters were so fascinating. I loved zeroing in on Doro and Mary, and it was so good. It was so juicy. I can't recommend this series enough. I'm so excited to continue on. I know that each book kind of takes a different, I think, cast of characters, but I think you have to read the books in order because they kind of reference each other. So definitely start with Wild Seed, but quickly read Mind of My Mind, because I think I liked Mind of My Mind even more than Wild Seed. It was so good. But I'm definitely a fan of Octavia Butler, and I will read all the things by Octavia Butler. The next book I have to talk about is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. So this was the February pick for Shelf Space Book Club, and by the time this video goes up, Charles from Books on Stereo and I will have done our live show, so I will link that live show down below if you want to check out some spoiler-free and spoiler thoughts from both of us. But I overall loved this book. I was so hesitant. I was so cautious going into this because it was so hyped and I was so afraid that it wasn't going to live up to those expectations that had been set. And I am happy to say that I was so pleasantly surprised with it definitely living up to those expectations for me. I will say that this was a very, very mixed bag of reviews for the book club as a whole, though. So this one follows a couple main characters in this fantasy world that is based on pre-Columbian America, and the world building was so fantastic. I loved this world building. I loved the exploration of all of the different clans and how each clan had different abilities and animal companions that they could call on. We follow three main characters who are all so incredibly different from each other. One is this boy who, as a very young boy, was basically transformed into a god or someone that could become a god for this clan. We also follow a character who is kind of this like rough and tumble sailor character. Starts off in jail for being publicly intoxicated, ends up being broken out of jail, and is set on this quest to transport this mysterious boy who claims he is a god to this other land. And then we also follow this girl named Naranpa, who is taking over as this main sort of priestess or this religious sect. And oh my goodness, I loved Serapio and Giala so much in this book. Oh my god. Nara, I will say her storyline was probably my least favorite, but by kind of the 50% into the book, I was really into her story. The writing for me was it was like the perfect writing style for my personal taste, because it never felt dense and it never felt like it was bloated with like endless descriptions of things or things I didn't truly care about. I felt like the writing was very succinct, to the point. It focused on the things I really liked focusing on. I really liked the world building details that we got. I love how she wrote such a diverse group of characters in such an organic way. It just felt so well done, in my opinion. The twists and turns at the end of this book were really intriguing for me. I couldn't put this book down. It was so fast-paced, I couldn't put it down. I will say, I talked to Elle over at Elliot Brooks about this book as well, and she mentioned that it was almost like it was a prologue for a new fantasy series. Like, she felt like this book was very much setting up for the rest of the series. And I have to agree. I think a lot of this book was putting pieces in place for future books to kind of address and start developing even further. I think a lot of the development was quite surface levels. I think that there were a lot of questions that were brought up. There were a lot of world building details we didn't get right away in this first book. So if you are a reader whose personal preference is to feel like you've read a complete story after reading the first book in a series, then I don't know that you would particularly like this one. I know that there are some series out there, I always think of Mistborn when I think of this, that the first book in that series, you could just read that first one and you feel like you've gotten a complete story. You feel like you don't have to continue on with the series if you didn't truly want to. and you would still feel satisfied with what you've read. I don't know that that's the case with Black Sun. I don't think you would be fully satisfied with just this particular story, especially considering the cliffhanger that this book ends on. It does end pretty abruptly, so it just depends on the type of reader that you are, whether or not you might really enjoy this. There are definitely a lot of questions that need to be answered. There are definitely a lot of world building details that we didn't quite dive deep into yet, but I'm hoping that that's what the future books are for. I'm personally not a reader that kind of needs all of those details right away. I'm okay with waiting for those if they come in later books. I'm just really excited for the sequel. I loved what I got from this book, and it's definitely has the potential to be a new favorite fantasy series if the sequels end up hopefully doing what they need to do in terms of answering questions and filling in some of the details that we were missing in this one. So I loved this. I would highly recommend it if this sounds interesting to you. It will be interesting to see where the sequel goes. I hope that we don't have to wait too long for the sequel, because I am dying after that ending. The last book I have to mention is Valor by Gwynne. Oh my god, I love this book so much, you guys, so much. I love The Faithful and the Fallen. I loved it for sure. It picks up right where we left off from Malice. So if you don't know anything about Malice, it is a kind of Celtic inspired fantasy world where we have a pretty large cast of main characters. It feels very much like Game of Thrones in that way, where every chapter is from a different character's perspective, and we're following different characters in different positions and different places in the world. And the main plot that's kind of driving this series forward is that we have our main character, who is kind of this chosen one, is very much like the stereotypical farm boy, ordinary kid who doesn't believe he's the chosen one. He's a very reluctant chosen one. And then we've got the other main character, who is kind of the main swordsman to this prince who believes he is the chosen one. And this prophecy is kind of at the center of this series. And the character work in this book is so excellent. I love every character in this book, even the characters that I love to hate. Like, I hate them, but it's like a fun, like, oh my god, like I hate you, I want you to get what's coming to you. I find the writing so fast paced. It really cuts through a lot of like the bloat and the descriptions, and sometimes we have characters that are journeying to another city, and usually, like in other fantasy books, those journeys can take forever and they're just boring, and it's like, let's sit down and eat and chat, and you're like, cut it out. And Gwynne does. He cuts out all of that like unnecessary dense description, and we get to the fun stuff right away. Like we cut through so much of what usually just bogs down a fantasy story. And I love that. And Gwynne's action scenes, like this book is so filled to the brim with action and fighting and wars and angels versus men and giants and ancient treasures. It's like every classic fantasy trope, but done in such a way that feels fresh, that feels new. I love this series. It's so much fun. We've got main characters who die, and they like die. They don't like come back. So you never know who's safe. The stakes are so high. It's so fun. It's so fun. I can't recommend this enough. So I need to continue on with the series really, really badly and finish it off, because this also has the potential to be a new all-time favorite fantasy series. If I could just finish it, I think it might be, because I love these characters so much. I feel so invested in their stories. So I'm really excited for Ruin. I've heard Ruin will ruin me, and I'm here for it. I'm so nervous though. So yay, go check out Faithful and the Fallen. So those were the fantasy sci-fi books that I read in the month of February. Did you see any that you've read and what did you think of them? Are there any that you're going to be checking out soon? I would love to know. Leave those comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!